Welcome back. The last series of lectures for this HTML crash course are going to focus on forms. Let's start off with the forms basics. A major function of really any website is to accept user information as input. That can be you typing in a search term into Google and then hitting submit. That can be you registering for a website, providing your email and password, or really any sort of submission to the site where you're providing information and then clicking some kind of submit button. We use the form tags to set up a form. Then, we can add special input tags to accept user information. And pretty much every major form element already has a corresponding input tag attribute. We'll discuss the basic input elements and special tags for right now, and then later on we'll discuss some more complex tags. At the end, what we do is we provide a submit input type, and that automatically adds in a button for form submission. Later on, we're going to also be exploring how to create these sort of forms automatically with Flask and Python. For right now, let's understand the HTML basics. That way, when we understand how to build them with Flask, we can connect the two. Let's get started. Alright, here I have a basic.html file connected to my browser, and there's nothing in this HTML file right now. So let's go ahead and autofill it with the basics of HTML, and we'll just provide a paragraph tag saying test, save that. We'll refresh the page, and then we can see test is showing up here, so we're good to go. Now let's come back here. I can remove this test, and what I'm going to do is add in a form tag. So I'll say form, hit enter, and it should automatically create a opening form tag for you, as well as a closing form tag. You'll notice that this opening form tag has several attributes, such as class, action, and method. We'll be discussing these attributes in more detail in the next lecture. For right now, feel free to delete them, so you just have a basic form opening tag and a basic form closing tag. Inside of this form, you can add things like headers and labels. So for example, I can say h1, log in, and then let's say h2, please input your email and password. I'll save that, and when I refresh this, it says login, please input your email and password. Now let's discuss how to actually put input tags. To do this, you start typing out input and have it autocomplete. Again, input tags will have attributes themselves, such as type, name, and value. Right now, let's just focus on the very basic ones, which is the type attribute. This type attribute essentially tells the browser what kind of actual input box you're going to render. If it's a default text, and I save this and refresh, then you'll see a little text box show up, and you can type text in here. There's other types, such as password, and this password input, if I save this and refresh, this is an input box specifically designed to accept passwords. And what that means is, as you begin to type, you'll see that the information is hidden from view. And that's because this input understands that passwords, for security purposes, should be hidden from someone looking over your shoulder. So we have these various types that we can supply to our inputs. Now you've probably noticed these other attributes, name and value. And these attributes themselves are going to make a lot more sense when we actually submit a form. But for right now, you can think of value as the actual value that is passed back to whatever the next page or whatever to your server is requesting upon submission of the form. Name here is the identifier of this value. Again, this will make more sense when we actually submit the forms. For right now, we can leave them blank and continue on. So we have an input type of password already. Let's create one more input type for the email. Save this. And when we refresh, now I see one for my email and then one for my password. Then finally, what we can do is add a submission button. So I can type out input, and then for the type, I will say submit. And if you just type submit like this with no name and no value, save this and refresh, you should notice a little gray submission button that's waiting to be clicked. Right now, there's no text inside of that submission button. So instead what we're going to do is for the value of submit, you can type out some sort of text string to show up inside of this text, inside of this little button. So I will say enter, save, refresh, and now I see enter here. So I'm providing value is equal to enter, and now I get to see enter inside of this button for that form. Okay, so let's see what happens when I actually provide an email and a password. So I will say my email at email.com, type in whatever 3 letters for a password, hit enter, and then right now nothing's actually happening. And that's because we haven't really selected any sort of action for our form. That is, those are attributes that we first saw when we typed out that form attribute tag. What we'll be discussing in the next lecture is how to actually accept this submission of the form and then send it either to another page or back to your server. The last thing I want to point out is that these specialized types, such as email, will also sometimes prevent you from submitting the form. So if we come back here and we try to submit something that is not an email, so notice this isn't an email because it doesn't have an @ operator, it doesn't have a .org or .com, it's just a string, not an email. And if I hit some random letters for password, I hit enter, notice the submission is actually getting blocked now. So some browsers will display this differently, but most of them will say something like, hey, please include an @ in the email address. So you can notice already, just by specifying the type as email, the browser will perform its own default checking to try to make sure that what's being provided is in fact an actual email. Okay, that's the very basics of forms. Remember, you just have a form tag and an input tag, and the type in the input tag dictates what's actually rendered in the browser. And certain types will have restrictions such as not being visible for password, checking if it's an email, and then we finally have a submit type, which will allow us to supply the information. We still haven't learned yet what actually happens when you click submit and connect it either to another page or to a server. Lastly, I'll show you one last type of input really just for fun, and that's the color input, which is fun to use. So if you say type input color, hit save, and then refresh the page, you get to see this little cool button, and if you click on it, and then you get to pick a color. So for example, I can pick green, I can change that shade of green, pick teal, hit OK, and then I'll see that color being updated. That's just a fun little input type. We probably won't use it really that often during the course, but I just wanted to show it to you. Okay, that's the basics of the actual form tags. Coming up next, we're going to discuss how to actually submit a form and how to redirect to another page. We'll see you there.